Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out another chapter of Poisoner in Chief. We're in the middle of a chapter called If Gottlieb was found guilty, it would be a real first. The death of Frank Olson in November 28, 1953, was a murder, not a suicide, he declared. This is not an LSD drug experiment story. It is reported as represented in 1975. This is a biological warfare story. Frank Olson did not die because he was an experimental guinea pig who experimented on a bad trip. He died because of concern that he would divulge information concerning a highly classified CIA interrogation program called Artichoke in the early 1950s, and concerning the use of biological weapons by the United States in the Korean War. If Gottlieb had been remembered at all, it was as a supporting player in the Frank Olson drama. Actors portrayed him on two televised documentaries in the case. Since the producers had no photos of him during his CIA days, they had to imagine what he looked like. At the first, he was called CIA Secret Experiments and produced by National Geographic in 2008. Gottlieb appeared dapper and white-haired as he pours LSD onto Olson's fateful bottle of Cointreau. Inaccurate both because he was just 35 years old at the time and because, according to witnesses, it was Lashbrook, not Gottlieb, who spiked the drinks that night. Gottlieb also made extended appearances in Air Moral's 4-hour film about the Olson case, Wormwood, which was released in 2017. The actor who played him, Tim Blake Nelson, is young and exudes exertive self-confidence. Wormwood is built around interviews in which Eric Olson recounts the story of his father's death and his lifelong search for the answers. He suggests that the deaths could have been a murder and that Gottlieb could have been involved. In 2017, Stephen Sirocco, a retired New York assistant director's attorney who had investigated the Olson case and remained interested in it, made his first visit to the hotel room where Olson spent his final night. A video crew filmed him as he opened the door to room 1018A and stepped inside. Some furnishings had been replaced, but the room's dimensions were laid out were the same as in 1953. Being here now, looking at it live, just raises the questions of how he could have done it. Sirocco said he looked around the room, but his reckoning, Olson would have had to reach an extraordinary speed in a small room, dive over a 31-inch high radiator that stands in front of the window, and smash through the glazed plat while ducking to avoid a window divider that was just 21.9 inches above the radiator. Sirocco wondered why, if Olson was intent on killing himself, he would try that kind of Superman move rather than simply opening the window and sliding out. If this would have been a suicide, it would have been very difficult to accomplish. Sirocco concluded. There was motive to kill him. He knew the deepest, darkest secrets of the Cold War. Would the American government kill an American citizen who was a scientist who was working for the CIA and the Army if they brought he was a security risk? There are people who say definitely. Frank Olson was not only one of Gottlieb's victims who returned to haunt him. One of the truth about MKUltra began leaking out. He became the subject of several lawsuits. He was forced to sit for days for harsh questioning. For him lay a Shakespearean reckoning. Foul deeds will rise through all the earth, overwhelm them to men's eyes. The first hint that Gottlieb would face trouble in court came in the early 1980s when 3 former inmates of the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary filed a lawsuit against the CIA and its director, William Casey. They asserted that in the 2 decades since Dr. Carl Pfeiffer used them as subjects in their drug experiments, they had begun plagued by hallucinations, flashback, paranoia, and other psychic disturbances, charged that the government had been negligent in allowing these experiments to proceed, and asked for damages under the Federal Claims Tort Act. Although Gottlieb was not named defendant, he would almost certainly have been called to testify if the case had gone to trial. It never did. On April 29, 1983, a federal judge dismissed the former inmate's suit on the grounds that the statute of limitations for the crimes they alleged had expired. Gottlieb could not celebrate that ruling. 10 days after it had handed down, he had undergone grueling cross-examination in other cases. This time, the plaintiffs were relatives to Velma Orlikoff, a Canadian woman who had been among Dr. Ewan Cameron's victims at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. Orlikoff had come to the Institute for treatment of postpartum depression in 1957 and was plunged into a nightmare from which she never recovered. Years later, her husband David, a member of the Canadian Parliament, sued the CIA. He charged that, at the agency's direction, Cameron had subjected his wife to horrific treatment that left her functioning at about 20% of her capacity, unable to read, use a fork, a knife, or recognize relatives. To prosecute their case, the Orlikoff family hired Joseph Routh, one of America's most combative civil rights lawyers. Rao won an early compelling Gottlieb to submit to pretrial questioning. During the spring of 1983, he endured 3-day-long sessions at the Boxwood House Motel in Culpeper, Virginia. Gottlieb's memory proved improbably blank. When Rao asked him what division of the CIA he joined when he hired in 1951, he replied, "I can't really remember that level of detail." Did he conduct research into the effects of electric shock? I don't remember. What did he tell the CIA investigators who questioned him after Frank Olson's death? I may be having a mental block. Did CIA officers coach him before his congressional testimony in the 1970s? My memory is hazy about that. Most remarkably, what was the relationship between Richard Helms, the officer of whom he had conceived MKUltra, and for 20 years was his chief patron and prosecutor? I don't remember what Mr. Helms's job was, Gottlieb testified. I really don't remember what his role was. Rao was openly scornful. What Dr. Gottlieb have done is to show a reckless disregard for human life. He said at one point, Gottlieb's lawyer during this deportations, he was represented by CIA attorneys, not Terry Lensinger, jumped to protest. You are badgering the witness, he complained. You are doing nothing but abusing this man. In this day-long interrogation and the 2 others that followed, Gottlieb offered a few intriguing insights. Asked the purpose of MKUltra, he answered with a single responsibly accurate sentence. MKUltra was a project to investigate the intelligence potential, defensively and then offensively, of the use of various techniques of behavior, control, and intelligence operations. He admitted that he had felt somewhat abused and quite angry when the CIA declassified MKUltra documents with other names redacted, but his clearly legible. Pressed about the Olson case, he became indignant. I was very upset that a human being had been killed, he told Rao. I didn't mean for that to happen. It was a total accident. You are one of the few people to say there was anything purposeful in it. Gottlieb admitted that some CIA officers had been disinclined to use techniques he developed because they found the idea distasteful and strange. They had moral objections. Asked if they felt for the torments Ewan Cameron had inflicted during his MKUltra work, he replied, I find it very difficult to answer that question. Did you ever consider you should adopt something analogous to the Nuremberg Code? Rao answered him. You did not, he replied. The Orlikoff case dragged on for 5 years and was finally settled out of court in 1998. The CIA agreed to pay Orlikoff family and the families of each of 8 other Canadians who suffered at Ewan Cameron's hands a total of $750,000 in compensation. He did not admit guilt or responsibility. That was hardly the end of Gottlieb's legal troubles. He faced another lawsuit filed on behalf of Stanley Glickman, the young artist whose life had collapsed after he met an American with a club foot at a Paris cafe in 1952. Glickman was living in New York when revelations about MKUltra burst into the news. Suddenly, for the first time in a quarter century since he drank that fateful chartreuse, he understood what might have happened to him. Urged on by his sister, Glickman began to write letters to the Department of Justice and others he imagined might help. No one did. In 1981, he filed a lawsuit against the Federal Tort Claims Act, charging the CIA with invading his privacy and intentionally harming him. He named two officers as defendants, Gottleib and Richard Helms. Lawyers for the CIA managed to delay this suit for years. It might have faded away when Glickman died of heart failure in 1992. His sister, however, refused to let it drop. A judge finally ordered Gottlieb to submit to questioning. On the morning of September 19, 1995, he arrived at the United States District Court in Washington for the first of what would be 4 full days of intense examinations. Gottlieb once again insisted that he had forgotten most of his past. When he asked about Bluebird, the first CIA special interrogation project, which was at a peak when he joined the agency, he replied, "The word Bluebird totally confuses me. I can't help you with that." His response to the question about his MKUltra deputy, Richard Lashbrook, was equally implausible. "He was your deputy," Gottlieb was asked. "I don't really have a clear memory of who my deputy was." He replied, on the matter at hand, he alleged drugging at Stanley Glickman at Café Select in Paris. Gottlieb was more precise. He said he never set foot in Paris before 1958, and therefore he could not have been involved in poisoning anyone there 6 years earlier. "It never happened," he insisted. "I've given 4 days of a limited amount of time. I have left on a question that is absolutely never happened, and it's incredible to me." The denial did not dissuade Glickman's lawyers. They continued to press their case and finally won a decisive victory. In 1998, a federal appeals court ruled that since Richard Helms was not alleged to have been directly involved in the drugging, he could not be prosecuted, but that the case against Gottlieb could proceed. Assuming that a jury would find that Gottlieb had an obligation to preserve the MKUltra documents that he ordered to be destroyed, the jury would be entitled to draw an adverse inference against Gottlieb. The court's opinion read, "The possibility that a jury would choose to draw such an inference, along with plaintiff's other circumstantial evidence that he will be drugged by the CIA, specifically by Gottlieb, is enough to entitle the plaintiff to a grand jury." Something almost unthinkable lay ahead. For the first time in Gottlieb's life, it appeared that he would be prosecuted. It would have to testify about MKUltra in public under oath and as a defendant. If Gottlieb is found guilty, it would be a real first. Thus, the title of the chapter, wrote one reporter who has covered the case. The agency has protected its very own well, not only Gottlieb, but others who were part of MKUltra. The trial is scheduled to begin on January 3rd. Gottlieb won a postponement for his trial for drugging Stanley Glickman. In the first weeks of 1995, as he waited for the trial to begin, detectives in New York began to push to reopen the Frank Olson investigation. No peace lay ahead. Around the time Gottlieb met one of his older colleagues, he remembered that he had once ridiculed this friend's admiration of Matthew Arnold's wistful poem, Dover Beach. He said he had not only changed his view of the poem, but had committed it to memory. "The world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy nor love nor light, neither certitude nor peace nor help from pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, wherever ignorant armies clash by night." Even as Stanley and Margaret aged, they remained active in the community around them. "Memory is tight these days. Money is tight these days," Margaret wrote to her family. "Sid is working 2 days a week on the Culpeper schools, doing speech pathology and loving his contact with his kids. Right at this moment, he is with hospice client, trying to help as he passes from his life. I volunteer with the adult reading program, and I also go to the elementary school and the jail. It's a variety. Other than what we are waiting winter out, and we are eager to have it to be time to dig up the garden. The journalist Seymour Hersh, who never stopped trying to uncover secrets, visited Gottlieb during this period. He was very strange, he later recalled. Gottlieb was living as if he was in an ashram in India. The place had no electricity and no running water. There was a peat moss toilet outside. He was trying to absolve himself to expatriate. He had been Catholic. He had have gone to a monastery. He was a destroyed man, riddled with guilt. Others who knew Gottlieb in these final years came to a similar conclusion. A lot of Sid's later life was spent atoning, whether he needed to or not, or for how he had been exposed publicly to some sort of evil scientist, said a teacher at the Child Care and Learning Center, a preschool where Gottlieb volunteered. A rabbi with whom he became friendly, Carla Theodore, who shared his adventurous spirits. She had been a union organizer to the South who became a rabbi and said that Gottlieb had told her that his own children refused to speak to him. And he added, I have done things I really regret, and I am learning to keep it to myself. I felt that it was on a path of expatriation, whether consciously or unconsciously, Rabbi Theodore remembered. There was enough cries of horror from near and far. It was an extremely big fact of the past. Somehow he was living around it, and there like a pink elephant. I once asked him if I could talk to him about it. He said yes. Not many people asked, but the thing was, for answers were so defended that I gave up after a few minutes. It was a barrier. I wasn't going to get the truth. He was a delightful person to interact with, but at the same time, I feel he grieved and suffered, and that he was always would be there. Maybe in retrospect, he was as puzzled by what he had done as if he were heard about it. Gottlieb died on March 7, 1999, in his home in Virginia. He was 80 years old. Margaret did not announce the cause of his death. Obituaries pushed over the next few days recounted all that was known about Gottlieb's work with MKUltra. In one of them, the CIA pathologist John Gittinger called Gottlieb one of the most brilliant men I've ever known, and he said he was willing to try anything to discover something. We were in the World War II mode, Gittinger said. During that time of the Cold War, the attitude had and the agency had was we were still fighting a war. And when you are fighting a war, you do things you might not ordinarily do. The CIA officer who had been Gottlieb's boss during his first 2 years in Munich, William Hood, was equally forgiving. I do think he was entirely out of line for some of the stuff they were doing, Hood said, but he added it's something of kind that I think anyone could understand unless they had been involved in it. Intelligence services should be confused with the Boy Scouts. John Marks, whose book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, brought MKUltra to broad public attention for the first time, struck a similar note. He was unquestionably a patriot, a man of great integrity, Marks told one obituary writer. Gottlieb never did what he did for inhumane reasons. He thought he was doing exactly what was needed. And in the context of the time, could he argue? But with his experiments on unwitting subjects, he clearly violated the Nuremberg standards, the standards under which, after World War II, were executed Nazi doctors for crimes against humanity. Every one of Gottlieb's obituaries grappled with the apparent contradiction between his evidently compassionate nature and his harsh work he did for the CIA. He tried to find a unifying thread in his life. Given his altruistic hobbies, one concluded, some may not quite what to make of the bizarre biochemist who waged America's Cold War battles in the cerebrums of the unsuspecting, but it was his patriotic faith in the rewards of experimentation and progress that somehow reconciles the communalistic homesteader with the psychedelic Mengele he was in earlier days. Soon after Gottlieb died, Eric Olson visited Sidney Bender, the New York lawyer who had persuaded the Glickman case. They drank a toast to the death of the man they considered a monster. Both had arrived at the same conclusion. Gottlieb died by suicide. Besides the case I was pursuing, the New York District Attorney Office was investigating Gottlieb for the possible murder of Frank Olson. Bender reasoned. There was a very serious concern of this. If he was found guilty, what would that mean to the whole CIA? It was an instrument through which he could be poisoned. Any jury trial would expose the CIA and what it had done, which was criminal in nature. Gottlieb was a guy who always had to be in control, and in the end, he decided what he wanted to control his own fate. His death was a way of protecting the CIA so it wouldn't be tainted by a civil or criminal case. He had been successful in fooling Congress, but the whole thing could have been opened up if there was either a trial in my case or which was about to start or a murder indicting in the Olson matter. Under no circumstances would he take full responsibility for what he had done. The alternative was to fall on his sword. The Washington lawyer who defended Gottlieb during his last years of legal entanglements, Tom Wilson, would not go that far. He did, however, say that the project was being tried for drugging Stanley Glickman, had greatly dispirited his client. He was concerned that he might never find any sense of peace of mind in his life, Wilson told an interview, and just didn't have enough fight left. Another of Gottlieb's friends recalled that he gradually became depressed, and it's hard to say how much was due to his heart ailment and how much was due to the endless lawsuits. It was not the same man the last few years of his life. Gottlieb's body was cremated. Margaret asked the funeral home not to disclose what became of his ashes. On a cloudy Saturday afternoon, several weeks later, about 100 people gathered in the gymnasium at Rappahannock High School to remember him. Gottlieb's two worlds came together. One reporter wrote afterward, most who spoke were neighbors and friends from his second life. There was also white-haired men from Langley who did not speak publicly but mingled afterwards. Friends from Gottlieb's second life shared their memories. One praised poems that Gottlieb had composed in his later years. Another recalled the wisdom he brought into their Zen Buddhist study group. A young man marked in a parka arrived the grieving widow as if he would say a few words. She did not recognize him, but she nodded in assent. She stepped to the microphone. Anyone who knew Sid knew that he was haunting by something. He said when he asked mourners to join him in reciting the Lord's Prayer in the hope that he would get rid of something, so Margaret and the family can live in peace. With Gottlieb gone, the already sluggish pace of investigations into the MKUltra slowed even further. The few of the CIA veterans who knew its secrets remained silent until death. A final chapter of the long cover-up could now unfold. It might have entitled, Everything Was Sidney's Fault. Gottlieb was long understood that his former colleagues wanted to absolve something and the CIA is responsible for the excesses of MKUltra. All swore to investigators that they knew little or nothing about MKUltra. None hid more than Helms, who had most to tell about, said the least. He feigned ignorance at all but the broadest outlines of MKUltra. Helms was a liar, but a charming and skillful liar, recalled the church committee's chief counsel, Frederick Schwartz. He lied about everything. That was important. Portraying Gottlieb as having been unsupervised and out of control was a sensible strategy. It obscured the fact that the senior CIA officers like Dulles and Helms approved and encouraged his work. Just as important, it deflected attention away from the institutional responsibility of the CIA, the White House, and the Congress. Those who talked to Gottlieb in the past few years, one obituary reported, say the chemist believed that the agency was trying to make him the fall guy for the entire program. That's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called You Never Know What He Was. I don't know either. Was that called a psychopath? I'm not a doctor, but they're making me see one. So if you see any truth here, like, subscribe, and enjoy and share. Have a good day.